time on the river Elbe. In front of the cameras, both sides behaved like the best of friends. But behind the scenes, the battle for Germany's spoils was now at its most intense.
Once the German collapse really began to get going, there was a huge sort of flurry of activity. There were so many targets, everybody was rushing around in all directions, securing stuff, looking for stuff, finding stuff, failing to find stuff. Denying or trying to deny as much as possible to the Russians, preventing the Russians getting there first and making off with it and nobody ever seeing it again. Lots of competition.
Both sides knew the real prizes. Hitler's top scientists had fled to mountain retreats in Bavaria, in the south of Germany. Nuclear physicist Werner Heisenberg and rocket engineer Wernher von Braun had come here to shelter from the fierce fighting in the north. They also wanted to be as far away as possible from the advancing Russian front. Racing through Bavaria, the Americans hoped to be the first to capture von Braun and his team of rocket specialists. But the German rocketeers were already making their own plans.
We had some top secret meetings with von Braun and some of his closest staff members to talk about the question, what do we do at the end of the war? We had considered, should we turn ourselves over to the Russians? And there were some indications that the Russians were possibly interested in rocketry, but we had heard so many bad things about the Russians. And I think we all realized that with the V2, we had made a major new contribution to high technology. And so we had hoped at least that this situation would help us to survive the war and to do something after the war which would be worthwhile.
Von Braun realized his rocket team's unique knowledge could guarantee them VIP treatment when the war ended. On the day after the announcement of Hitler's death, the German rocket men emerged from hiding. In his mad dash south, von Braun had broken his arm in a car accident. They were relieved to be surrendering to the Americans rather than the Russians. Von Braun was dispatched to the United States. His future designing rockets now seemed assured, provided his involvement with the SS and his use of slave labor was overlooked. "50 miles to the east, the agents chasing atom scientist Werner Heisenberg were also closing in. They were far in advance of American frontline troops, and the SS were known to be active in the area. Colonel Boris Pasch realized it would be dangerous to go much further.
Was I to hold up until the infantry could join us? Or should I go on in the manner of past operations? I decided to plunge ahead. I felt then, as I do now, that the urgency drummed into us by Washington justified the advance. In fact, made it imperative.
Heisenberg was at his family's home above the Walchensee Lake. His son Jochen was 6 years old at the time and can remember the Americans approaching.
It was clear that the American troops were advancing here, and my father moved quite often up the hill to look where he could see fighting going on. And he informed then also the people that most likely the Americans would be coming.
Avoiding the SS, Colonel Pasch and his men advanced on Heisenberg's house. On May the 3rd, they finally captured their #1 target.
I remember that at that time I was visiting with my father by my grandmother. There came a call saying that my father should come back to his house immediately. Then I came up here and we did see American soldiers. They were here on the terrace and seemed very friendly.
Heisenberg was sent back to England for interrogation. But it would be several months before Hitler's top physicist revealed how much he knew about building an atom bomb. Four days after Heisenberg's capture, Germany surrendered. In Berlin, life was beginning to settle down after 5 years of war. As Britain, America and Russia took over their zones of occupation, the relationship between the Allies reached a new low point. British Commando Unit 30AU was operating in the city and received a frosty reception from the Russians.
It was very, very touchy and difficult, and people had to be pretty careful that it never broke out into any kind of violence, and I don't think it ever did. But this became a sort of mutual hostility. I mean, that's where I first became conscious of the fact that there was a Cold War, just a few weeks after the war ended. We were into the Cold War.
The Russian hostility was understandable. 30AU were hardly in Berlin on a peace mission. Their agents were now making trips deep inside the Russian zone, on clandestine operations to smuggle the wives and families of the captured scientists over to the West.
We actually dressed a German woman up as a British female ATS officer and drove her through 2 Russian checkpoints from West Berlin through Helmstedt into West Germany. She was a good actress and she spoke a little bit of English, but fortunately nobody spoke to her, so she was all right, and the Russians probably wouldn't have known anyway.
Having been reunited with their families, key German scientists were then brought over to Britain. Helmut Walter, inventor of the rocket engine for the Me-163, came to the north of England to continue working with an all-German team of scientists. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, massive shipments of German scientific materials, technology and research were boxed up and taken to Britain, America and Russia. As for uranium seized by the Alsos mission in places like Haigerloch, over 1,000 tons was shipped back to America's Manhattan Project, who were building a huge stockpile for their own atomic bomb research. Alsos's #1 target, Werner Heisenberg, and 9 other German physicists were interned at a country house in England. In a last-ditch attempt to find out more about the Nazi bomb project, secret microphones were placed around the house to eavesdrop on the Germans. The scientists gave little away until a radio broadcast on the 6th of August 1945 shocked them into talking.
Here is the news. Early this morning, the most destructive power invented by man was unleashed on Japan. The atomic bomb.
Immediately, the physicists tried to work out how the Americans had done it. The hidden microphones recorded Heisenberg's deliberations. He seemed to completely misunderstand bomb physics. His wartime design for an atom bomb called for thousands of kilograms of uranium, while the Hiroshima bomb used just 56. To the British and Americans listening in, this finally explained why the German bomb project never succeeded. Shortly afterwards, Heisenberg was released and returned to Germany. He was no longer considered a threat. Three months after VE Day, the 15th of August was declared Victory in Japan, VJ Day.
Far into the night, the happy crowd screamed their relief at the end of the greatest war in history. New York never celebrated like this before, but never did they have a better reason.
The